every once in a while I would get a comment, a question: why don't you play this in D&D? The answer to this question is at the same time very simple and very complicated. So let me start this with a very basic supposition. If you don't know, if this is your first video what you're watching from the channel, or if you just watched some Let's Play videos, and if you don't know what we like to do here, then let me explain some very basics. What we're doing on this channel is that we are adapting WarCraft into a TTRPG. Not just World of Warcraft, but the Warcraft setting in general. And we are making an RPG that is meant to fit the unique elements of the Warcraft setting best. So, to many players, a very simple answer to play any TTRPG campaign is just play D&D or Pathfinder. And there's nothing wrong by itself with that question, with that kind of approach. But that is not what I decided to do for many reasons, and that is not what I wanted to do, because in the end I do not think that D&D really fits Warcraft really well. And in this video I want to explain to you why I don't play Dungeons & Dragons or Pathfinder. See, Dungeons & Dragons, D&D, is overall a great system. It's a great system for many players. Millions of players around the world are enjoying playing the system with all kinds of settings. But still, despite the great variety of settings that have been made for D&D or that are using D&D, it is still a very specific system for a very specific kind of setting. Despite the great differences between Forgotten Realms and Eberron or Exandria, despite the great differences between them, it is still made for a specific kind of setting, with a specific kind of feel. And while Warcraft, on the surface, doesn't seem to be too far apart from these. You got humans, you got orcs, you got warriors, paladins, priests. You got a lot of the same general basic tropes on the surface. When you start really getting into it, and all the things that Warcraft has added over the decades of its existence, you start to see elements that are on one side very unique, on the other side are very weird, different. Like, what do you really do with many of the more newer, unique concepts in the setting? Let's just look at the goblins of World of Warcraft. They have some elements in common with the common fantasy goblins, some elements in common with Warhammer kind of stuff, in the kind of weird way in which their technology works. Like in Warcraft 40k, orcs just paint their vehicles red, and that somehow makes those vehicles go faster because the orcs believe it makes them go faster. That is a very Warhammer related thing, very tied to the mechanics of the Warhammer setting. But you kind of see a little bit of that schizo tech in the Warcraft goblins. And how do you adapt their technology? They're not artificers. The goblin tinker or any other tinker in the Warcraft setting is a very different thing from the artificer. You could try to cram it, force the goblin tinker to work like the artificer from D&D, but in the end, when you really get into it, it doesn't use the same kind of stuff. You could adapt the artillerist artificer with their cannon to have an actual normal physical cannon to be used by a goblin tinker. You could try to do that. You could adopt it like that. But it's not. But it would be really forcing these very disparate elements together. More importantly, something that is very fundamental to the lore that underlies the system of D&D is Vancian magic. People don't really realize that today now too often. At least I get the feeling like they don't realize that because people just don't talk about it, it's not ever brought up. But Vancian magic is a very specific type of a magic system. Vancian magic lies under the supposition, this base supposition, that spells are alive. Spells aren't just like a little poem you write down in a spell book. A spell is alive in a way, and it lives in your mind, like living memes. Memes in the original sense, in the original Dawkinsian sense of a basic thought unit, of a basic unit of thought, of a concept that kind of takes on a life of its own. Like it's a little bit like like Dawkins's meme, a little misunderstood, or interpreted too literally from his actual words, and interpreted to mean that this meme, this thought, actually took on a life of its own, that it's actually alive and it actually wants to be replicated, and it has certain needs like a living being. Spells in Vancian magic are alive. That's why you need to remember them every day. Every day you need to memorize the spells. Because if you don't have to memorize the spells, why... if you don't have to... The spells aren't alive, you don't have to memorize them like that. Why does your wizard only remember, like, say 5-10 spells per day? Like, if I learn a poem, I'm not going to and I use that poem regularly every other day, every third day, I'm not going to forget that poem after a few days, after a few years, or I'm not going. If I remember this poem today, I'm not going to forget it tomorrow. When we were in schools in Poland, we were taught a lot of poems. I forgot a lot of those poems because I didn't really care about them. But one thing that most people in Poland would be able to recite to you, at least in part, is the beginning of Pan Tadeusz, the Polish national poem. Litwo, ojczyzno ty moja, ty jesteś jak zdrowie, ile cię trzeba cenić, ten tylko się dowie, kto cię stracił. Dziś piękność twą widzę w całej ozdobie i pisuję, bo tęsknię po tobie. I forgot, probably dropped like a line or two somewhere in there, but I still remember a lot of it very vividly because I used it a lot, because I had to remember it a lot in school. So if you were a wizard and you remembered some spells, if the spells were just that, well, if the spells were just a poem you had to remember, or a set of gestures you had to use with the poem, if those were the spells, you would remember them all the time. You wouldn't have to memorize them every day. But in the Vancian magic system, you have to memorize them constantly because the spells are alive. Because that's why you only can remember a certain set of spells, a certain number of spells every day, memorize, because those spells want to be remembered, replicated, etc., and they fight against each other, and they compete against each other, and this creates this whole Vancian magic system. And D&D is largely based on this whole lore basis. Now let's say you adapt WarCraft into this setting, into this system. Now, there is no such thing in WarCraft. The spells are not live, at least not in that way, and they do not fight, and they do not want to be remembered in that way. So why does your mage only remember a certain set of spells? If you're just plainly adapting the system as it is without thinking about the core implications of the lore behind the original system, you're just thoughtlessly replicating the thing that the other system was doing. You need to think about how that all works. The easiest way to change that would be to remove the whole spell slots, the system of spell slots and memorizing, etc., and replace it with a mana system. Say, like I do not remember, because I do not play D&D, I do not remember the exact amount of spell slots that you get as a wizard, but say at level, I'm going off BG3 if I remember correctly, that say at level 4 you get like 3 level 1 slots. Normally you get 3 level 1 slots, 2 level 2 slots, and 1 level 3 spell slot. Let's say that's what you get at level 4. I think that's what it is, but then don't quote on me on that. Now, so this level for mage from this Warcraft adapted system, instead of having these like 3 times 1, 2 times 2, and 1 times 3, you could just sum these up and get like 3 mana from the level 1 slots, 4 mana from the level 2 slots, and 3 mana from the level 3 slots, and you get 3 plus 4 plus 3, that's 7 plus 3, 10. So you get 10 mana at level 4. And you can use this mana however you wish. You can use this mana on any spells that you ever used, because that's how mages work in World of Warcraft. That's how mages work in Warcraft, because they just, if they use that spell, they remember that spell, they can just use it. They don't have to memorize it. And if you have a level 3 spell, you can just spend 3 of that mana on a level 3 spell, then you can spend the next 3 mana on another level 3 spell, and you just spend 6 mana. And you left with 4 mana, so you can use another level 3 spell again, but then you're just left with 1 mana. On one hand, it gives this mage a lot more versatility compared to the D&D wizard, and it really, just this really throws the whole system out of balance. Spellcasters in D&D are already very powerful as they are, and if you give them and this constraint on their spell slots keeps a certain sort of balance, and it's one of the reasons why the system still works, and why it's kind of stops working at very high levels, because wizards get really OP, wizards, sorcerers, etc. get really OP because they get some really crazy spells. But still, at least at certain levels, it is a core supposition of the balance. If you have to change the system so it fits the lore of the actual setting that you're using, but then you throw everything out of balance and you start thinking about how to change the rest of the system to keep it in balance, and then you start giving warriors abilities, essentially giving warriors spells to try to rebalance that against those mages, and then you get a whole lot of work at changing the system so fundamentally that it stops resembling D&D. So Vancian magic is a very big element of why I don't think D&D really fits Warcraft, if you really think about it, and a big part of why I don't play D&D with my Warcraft game. And also, I just really don't like the Vancian magic system, because I know that there is the whole lore I explained about how spells are alive. That explains why you have to memorize it, but I always just found it extremely stupid that you have to memorize the same spell every day. And I don't care if there is a lore explaining it, I just don't like it. I just don't like it, okay? Another big element of D&D that really lies at the core of the system is its class system. D&D is a heavily class-based system where your character has to pick a class and a subclass that defines a lot of what that character can do. Well, you can multi-class, you can like homebrew a little bit to make like special subclasses for a very specific kind of character. Like to this day, I don't believe there is an official material for a Fey-derived sorcerer. Like that is so strange to me that they didn't make a Fey sorcerer, a sorcerer that is descended from like an archfey or a fey, and it gets their power from fey, and it gets fey-themed spells. Like, they still didn't make that kind of sorcerer officially. Like, this feels very weird to me. Like, sorcerers feel just so close to the ideas of fey to me. But that's a little bit of a digression on this point. The D&D is highly dependent on this class system, and then you get like releases of systems that were adapted into D&D. Either you have to remove the classes from D&D and change core fundamental principles of the system, and at that point you have to ask, like, why don't you just make your own system? Or you have to somehow cram this very individualistic universe into this very class-based system. You can start like make certain classifications of these characters, but the whole principle, foundational principle of the universe is that they're very individual, very different, and each of them is very unique. And the foundational principle of the system of D&D is that it's a class-based system that segregates the characters into neatly tied classes. And I love my neatly segregated classes, but those two things just do not work very well together. WarCraft by itself, maybe it doesn't by itself clash with this class-based system. You could easily make a class-based system, D&D style class-based system for WarCraft. Like, heck, there was the whole World of Warcraft setting for 3rd edition and 3.5 edition for D&D. There were two separate RPGs for two very closely related editions of D&D. And technically, the World of Warcraft RPG wasn't technically D&D, it was technically D20 based, and it was technically its own system, but it was heavily based on 3.5 edition. It just changed a lot of the classes. Instead of a fighter, you had a warrior. Instead of they added, for example, the Tinker that I talked about before, and like they added this class that was a scout that we haven't seen anywhere else. So I don't remember what that. It wasn't a rogue, it wasn't a hunter, it was a whole different class that I don't really remember what that class was doing. I'd have to take a look at this again. But anyway, so you can make a Warcraft-based class system that fits the D&D mold. So by itself, the setting, it wasn't a problem. However, it wasn't what I was looking for. Because I wanted my system to be more individualistic, like that whole Marvel idea I talked about. I wanted a system where each character was unique and different. I wanted a system where every character could work on their own, individually, as a very unique, extraordinary individual. And that is a big part of why I didn't want to use the class-based D&D system in my game. Now, the other major system, as of this video, we might get into Daggerheart at the end. As of this, the recording of this video, the other major system for tabletop RPGs was, of course, Pathfinder. And there are several major reasons for why I don't play Pathfinder. There are just things I just do not like about Pathfinder. It's still a great system that works well for many people, but it doesn't work well for me for several reasons. One of the big reasons why I just don't like Pathfinder is just how crunchy it gets. It gamifies things that should not be gamified. Like people were trying to convince me to like learn more about it, so I understand it better, how it works better. And I watched a little bit of a real play of Pathfinder, and one person got sick, and they had to puke. The character had to puke, and there was a puke action. Like, why is that? Why does it have to be gamified? Why doesn't the character can just say that? Can the game master just say, okay, you spend your turn on puking your guts out? Why does it have to be gamified? Why does it have to be specific? The action that is written up in the book, like it's a spell. Puking is not a spell. Like, what is? You know what I mean? It's just gamifies things that shouldn't be gamified. Or one of my favorite examples of things that shouldn't be gamified is recall knowledge. Recall knowledge, if I recall correctly, takes up your whole action, or either a whole turn or your whole action. I don't remember every detail because I don't play the system. But recalling knowledge takes up your whole action. So while the other players are fighting, like slashing the swords and like slinging spells, there's this one guy that's trying to remember what that monster is doing, and he's going like, for a whole minute or 6 seconds. I don't remember how long the turn is. What's that about? Does it really take people like 6 seconds or a minute of just very focused thinking to remember something? Like, maybe I'm weird, maybe there's something different with my brain, but I either remember something or I don't. It doesn't take me a minute to remember something. Like, if I don't remember it immediately, I do not remember it. Maybe I'm weird. Maybe no one else does this. But that is very weird to me, that you have to stand and remember while people are slinging spells and fighting and stuff. The second major reason why I didn't play Pathfinder, didn't like playing Pathfinder, is because of this whole racial rarity system. Like, in Pathfinder, certain races are supposed to be like common, uncommon, or rare. It doesn't necessarily mean that like the rare races are more powerful than the common races. They're just supposed to be lore-wise more rare. On one hand, I kind of understand where it's coming from. Like like you shouldn't be having like Gorons running around everywhere. But on the other hand, like the whole thing with TTRPGs is that you can be whatever you want. The RPG is created to satisfy the player. The RPG is created to make the player happy. A good GM or DM doesn't like block things for the player because a good GM or DM will accommodate and adapt things for their player because it's supposed to be for them, for the GM and the players. It's supposed to be to make them happy, to make their collaborative fiction work together. Meanwhile, Pathfinder technically only enforces these like racial rarity rules in like the Adventurers League, this like official systemized gameplay. Only there they enforce it, but even there, then why, if that system isn't based on the power of these races, why even do that? And if you criticize the system, Pathfinder players get really mad. Pathfinder players, on the whole, from my experience, Pathfinder players really do not take criticism well. And if you criticize this whole racial rarity system, like, they get really mad. Like, you shouldn't be having these races running around because they're rare, because it's immersion. If your immersion requires some players to be unhappy, then you shouldn't be playing together. If a player wants to play a rare race, I am not going to tell them no. If a player wants to play like even some rare weird combination, I am not going to tell them no. At the worst, I am going to ask them, how does this work? If someone wants to play Warcraft, and if someone brought to me, I keep bringing this example, but it never happened. It's just a ridiculous example I keep bringing up. If someone brought to me a character that was like Death Knight and Demon Hunter at the same time, which has some very different, very clashing concepts, or like an undead paladin. If someone brought up to me an undead paladin, I wouldn't be telling them, no, you can't play that because that's stupid, because you're stupid for wanting to play something rare and unusual. I would tell them how. I would ask them, how does this work? Explain this to me. And we can work this out together. We can try to work something out together, or we can together figure out that this doesn't actually work and we abandon the concept. That's how a DM is supposed to do it. You're supposed to accommodate the players, not give them strict rules on what race, how many of a given race can be in a group. Like, what if their adventuring group is a whole as a whole group of Gorons that banded together to deal with some problem that is specifically about Gorons? You want to have a whole party of Gorons, but you can't have it because it's a rare system, and you can't tell the Pathfinder players that the system is wrong, because they get really mad, and it's a whole other problem. Of course, on top of all that, Pathfinder is still a system heavily based on D&D. Even the second edition is still heavily based on the whole D&D ideas. It still uses the Vancian magic that I talked about before. It still uses the class-based system of D&D. So it still has those core concepts of the other system that are still were not what I was looking for in my game. But the real main reason why I wasn't playing D&D or Pathfinder or Daggerheart or anything else is because I already had a system of a sort when I got into it. See, I used to play like a little bit of D&D here and there, never had a really real group of friends to play with way back then, but I did play a little bit of D&D here and there. Like 3rd edition D&D before I got into it again. And when I really got into it, what really got started me into this was a guild in World of Warcraft. And when I started it, the guild had a very basic system. It was a very basic system that was like, we basically just had attack rolls and defense rolls. And if you, on attack, if you rolled 2 to 24, you did no damage. If you rolled 25 to 49, you did 1 damage. 50 to 74, you did 2 damage. 75 to 99, you did 3 damage. And if you were really lucky and rolled 100, on a D100 dice, of course, if you rolled 100, you dealt 5 damage if you were very lucky. And a defense roll that had basically the reverse of that, where the lower rolls meant the more damage you took. So it was a very simple, very basic system that I started with because I got it from that guild, and I started building on top of that. At first I added healing rolls, then I added control rolls that allowed to like stun enemies. Then we started with dots and HOTS, meaning healing over time. We started adding all sort of stuff, and the system was building up, started adding professions, crafting, started adding social roles like a persuasion, performance, deception. The system was building up on top of all of that. But I already had a kind of a system when I started with this. And that is the real main reason why I never played any of those games before. Why I didn't play any of those games, didn't use any of those other games, other systems for my game. As a final note, I want to return to the topic of Daggerheart, which is becoming a big topic right now. A lot of people are talking about it, praising the system, and I have no doubt that it's a great system that will really work for a lot of players. And Matt Mercer is a great RPG designer, probably much better than me, who can probably balance things much better than me. But it's not a system for me and my group. I don't know a lot about Daggerheart. I'd have to really dig into it. But I wasn't a fan of the whole like rolling with fear, rolling with hope, or like this. That wasn't from Daggerheart. That was from this horror-themed system that they released, Candela Obscura, I think, from this horror-based system that they released a little earlier. And this system, Daggerheart, is supposedly very similar to that one in many ways. And this whole rolling with fear, rolling with hope. And I'm not a fan of that. I'm just not. Look, please, dear Daggerheart players, nobody has said this to me yet, but I want to get ahead of it. This is not an insult, okay? I am not trying to tell you that your system is bad or wrong or stupid. I just don't like this feature that I heard about the system. Okay, just please do not get insulted by me not liking something about your system, alright? And on top of that, of course, like I already said, I already had a system that I built everything on top. So I think that is everything I wanted to talk about here. All the major things that I wanted to mention about why I don't play the other systems, why I don't play D&D, why I don't play Pathfinder or Daggerheart. Maybe I will get convinced to more Daggerheart when I learn more about it. Maybe. I don't know. I'm not a cow. I change my opinions somehow. That is a Polish idiom that nobody listening to this will understand. But maybe I will change my views in the future. But still, I will probably keep playing my own system that I spent a lot of hours designing, a lot of hours working with. So that is why I don't play D&D or Pathfinder for my WarCraft TTRPG game. And if you do enjoy playing it with D&D or Pathfinder or Daggerheart or anything else, all the more power to you, and I hope you have fun with it as much as I have fun playing it with my own system that I still believe is a better fit, tailor-made for Warcraft. And I hope to see you again soon.